Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Chulin daf Lamed Vav. We are going to begin on Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, the second line from the top. So, in yesterday's daf, we were discussing, based on the Mishnah, what is the status of dam shchita. Namely, when it comes to certain liquids, 7 of them in particular, which is the acronym for Yad Shachadam, those 7 liquids are a machshel kabel tuma. It's necessary to have this liquid form in order for something to be shaykh to become tameh. Now, the blood which comes out of the shchita, is that a machshel kabel tuma? So, in this, it was a machlokas, and we're going to continue with that. And the machlokas is based, among other things, on the other two extremes. Dam cholalim, which namely animals that were killed, so the din is that blood is machshir. However, when it comes to dam shemes, an animal that died on its own, so its blood is not machshir. So the question is, do we compare the dam shchita to dam cholalim, and therefore because of that, then it would also be a machshir? So that is the machlokas. So with that, the Gemara continues. Tana Rabbi Shmuel, the pasuk says, "V'dam cholom yishta," which we said specifically when it comes to the dam chololim, it is a machshir because it's like yishta, it's like a liquid. You could like literally almost like to consume, which is mashma. It's just like any other liquid, which is makabel tuma. So prat v'dam kiluach shena machshir as Israel, excluding dam kiluach, blood that spurts out, that will not be machshir if it falls onto vegetation, on produce. Says Rashi, she makes as a behema betchilo hadam shaisis betipa achas or shtayim, the first shootings out of blood. V'achachu mekalech v'achachu mashchir. Afterwards, the blood blackens. Skipping 2 lines in Rashi, amol dam kiluach lo havi dam hanefesh. The dam kiluach is not considered to be the dam hanefesh, so therefore that is excluded from dam chololim. So Tan Rabbanim. So the Gemara says like this: Hashaykhet v'hitis dam al hadalas. We want to make sure our fruits and vegetables are clean. Imagine that on your gourd you have shchita, and this blood squirted onto these gourds. Now the gourds are tallish, they're detached from the ground, otherwise there'd be nothing to talk about. And Rashi says more specific, not only is it tallish, but it's still truma. So the question is this something which is susceptible to tuma, and therefore is this blood going to make this melon, this gourd, susceptible to tuma? So Rabbi Yomi Hochsher, Rabbi Yomi Chulin. So we have this interesting machlokas. Rabbi Chia straight up says this interesting language of Chulin, that it's hanging, which usually means some element of suffix or uncertainty or hesitance. We're going to see what that means. However, Rabbi just says that it is Hochsher. So Rabbi Yomi Hochsher, Rabbi Yomi Chulin. So you have 2 opinions, which is beautiful that they voice their opinions, but which one are we supposed to support? So Rav Shimon. Let's hold like the shita of Rav Shimon. What do you mean Rav Shimon? He's not here, but he was in our Mishnah. What was that? Rav Shimon Omer shchita machsher lo dam. He says that only the shchita is machsher, but not the blood, right? In other words, when our Mishnah a couple of dafim ago talked about a person did the shchita and no blood came out, so the question is that machshir? So if there's no blood, so the question is maybe not to do netilas yadayim because it's not shaykh to tuma. And there we were talking about, maybe it's talking about chulin because it says the word chai among other reasons. So the question is the case of chulin shenas al taras truma, can't be truma because truma cannot be meat. So it's chulin shenas al taras kodesh. Does it have the capacity to mix that into a shlishi? So we spent a couple of blot discussing that. Now, according to Rav Shimon, he says that it's actually not the blood that is the machshir, just the act of the shechita itself is what's the machshir. So even though it's true that no blood came out, it doesn't make any difference. the din still is that it will be susceptible. However, the dam that lands onto these melons, these gourds, is not machshir. Says Rashi, in dam machshir, the habli Rabbi yochid b'makom shnayim. So Rabbi, who says it is hochshir, is 1 against 2. Why 1 against 2? Because apparently Reb Chia, who says Chulin, he's maybe saying it's not necessarily hochshir either. But we'll have to see exactly what that means by Chulin. How is it 2 against 1? So we're gonna have to understand what Chulin means. So now, in the event where the blood has been on this melon for the entirety of the shechita, from the beginning into the end, which means you never wiped off the blood in the meanwhile, which is probably a good thing to get blood off of your vegetables and melons. So if it was there the whole time, then we're going to say it is in fact considered to be a mukhshir, because this dam shechita, we do make a hekesh to mayim, and therefore just like water is machshir, so too dam shechita is machshir. Ki plegi be niskaneach hadam bein simul simon. Now you're cutting both simonim, the kan and the veshet, and let's say you cut only one of the simonim, and it's not an issue of shehiyah, only for a split second, so you could have a small delay before you cut the second simon. And in the meanwhile, the blood is wiped off. So at the time that there was not blood on this for the beginning and the end. So Rabbi Savar so he holds that the shechita is the entire process, halachically. And we said this has other ramifications. For example, din yaitse, let's say you shechted one simon outside of the designated area, you brought it back inside for the second. So if you hold yesh chilin milchaviat sof, so then you were violating yaitse. If it's eno el b'soif, so since at the time of the gemar shechita was inside, didn't violate it. So it's one of numerous nafkaminas that we saw before. V'hai dam shechitahu. So in this situation, the fact that you did a shechita at the beginning and the end, the whole thing counts as something. So therefore, it's considered to be a shechita from the very beginning. So therefore, that's the reason why Rabbi says it's hochshir, because every aspect of the shechita is machshir, and the dam is machshir, but it has to be dam shechita. So if the beginning blood is also called dam shechita, so then it's machshir. Rabbi Chia Samer eno shechita el b'soif. The shechita is at the end. So what? So therefore, the blood that was on the gourd at the beginning doesn't really matter, but it's really the blood that stays on it to the end. And therefore, this now we can have an insight into what the word toilin means. B'hai dam makahu. The first blood is just considered like that of a wound. It's not considered to be dam shechita, to be machshir. My toilin toilin hadavar ad gemar shechita. Why? Is lo dam b'soif shechita machshir. V'lo lo machshir. It's all totally. If the dam is there at the end, so then it's machshir, because that's what he says. Besof is the shechita, and dam shechita, that blood is machshir. However, if the blood was wiped off before the second simon, so then it's not considered to be dam shechita, rather it's considered to be dam of a wound. However, once the shechita takes place, so therefore that blood already is considered to be blood of the actual end shechita. So therefore, that's what he means, toilin. So what does he really mean, therefore? Really, the blood is a machshir. So what do you mean to support Rav Shimon? Rav Shimon says that the shechita is the machshir, not the dam. Rav Shimon lo machshir. Rav Chia machshir. According to Rav Shimon, it's not machshir. So my answer is, what does it mean to support Rav Shimon? It's b'niskaneach, when they wipe it off, mihu hashavel hadadi. There they do agree. Why? Mar lo machshir. According to Rav Shimon, it's not machshir anyway, right? The dam is not a machshir anyway. However, mar lo machshir, and also the other opinion of toilin, since it's not there at the end, so therefore the blood also at the beginning doesn't do anything. Therefore, Havli Rebbe Chad, Rebbe, who says that it is machshir even at the beginning, is only one opinion. Because according to both opinions, the beginning, if we want to look at the blood from two parts. The first part, both Rav Shimon, obviously, because he says blood is never machshir, dam shchita, but also the actual blood, and also this other sheet of Chulin, Rabbi Chia, who says they both hold that the blood at the beginning is not machshir. So therefore it's 2 against 1. That's the reason why we should support it. So it's a novel approach of how to interpret that. Rav Ashi gives a second interpretation. What does it mean, Chulin? Chulin l'oil mashma. It means it's always Chulin. It's not like we're Toila until something takes place. Chulin just mashma that we are always in a state of uncertainty. And when it comes to the sheet of Rav Chia, who says this his statement of Chulin, and you wiping it off, spukim masafkale. Actually, once the blood has been wiped off, that's when he's unsure in that situation, because the blood was there from the beginning but not the end. So what's his suffix? By Chulin, so basically he's a case of constant doubt, because he doesn't know what the din actually is. Do we say Yishno Shchita Milchil V'Yad Sof or not? If you say it's Milchil V'Yad Sof, so even though you wiped off the blood, it's still machshir. However, if you hold Eino El B'Sof, then it's not machshir. And therefore the question is, what do we do with this truma? So we don't want you to eat it, because maybe in fact it was machshir, did make it tummy. On the other hand, we're not going to burn truma b'safik. And therefore that's what he means, that we just are in this state of constant uncertainty. Okay, and Rashi says, "Im nis kaneach kodim gemar shchita." Obviously, if the blood was not wiped off, he'll definitely say it's a problem. But it will say it was wiped off, and then afterwards, v'achakach noga tuma b'zroyim, something tummy touched the zroyim, these the las, whatever it is. So then that's the question, because it's not going to be matam unless it's machshir. So the question was, it machshir? So my baba is smachal de Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon lo machshir. Rav Chia sveka. He doesn't say the same thing, right? According to Rav Shimon, he's with great levels of certainty the blood's not machshir. Both agree they don't burn it. Mar lo sarfe. Obviously, Rav Shimon says you don't burn this truma because, after all, it's not machshir according to him at all, for sure. Umar lo nisarfe, they're having, and also the sheet of Rabbi Chia also, because it's a suffix. So Havlei Rabbi Chad, according to Rabbi, he says it's mamish machshir, and therefore Rabbi goes, you are going to burn this truma, because he's certain that it is tamei. So we're not going to burn it. But Halki Kamer, Kigain Zeis, Chulin, in this case, we're going to be Toilo Echelo Sarfin. So those are the two interpretations. Question 7. Hashayichet v'hitis mayim ahadalas, Rav Chia armor Chulin. What does it mean, Chulin? So Chulin means he holds Yish Eno Shchita El B'Soif. So we have to be Chulin to see, we're going to wait until to see if the blood was wiped off or not. Or alternatively, that's Rav Papa. Rav Ashi gives a second answer. He says no, it means Chulin is forever, which means lo oichel lo sarfin. We don't eat it. We're not going to burn it, because he actually does not know what the din is. Do we say Yeshua Shchina or not? And that's something which he wasn't sure about, and therefore that's why Chulin is not mashma for a few minutes until we finish. Let's watch the rest of the shchita. It means we just don't know what to do, and therefore we're not going to burn it. Okay, fine. So with that said, let's continue. Boy Rav Shimon Lakish. There's a kasha that's brought down in a couple other places, in Psachim and Menachos. So Serid Shel Menachos says Rashi, Kurti Kamach, you have clumps of flour of a mincha offering, and there was no shemen, there was no liquids that were put into this. It was a dry flour. Now again, normally you would think you need a liquid to make it machshir kabel tumah. So, the question is, does it have the capacity to make things tamei? So, kimahani chibas hakadosh l'sui gufe l'minyana be'rishon b'sheni loy odem l'shna. So in other words, we know that there's a concept called chibas hakodesh, which means, as Rashi says, v'habasar u'rabas eitzim l'vayna. So even wood, even frankincense, these things which are dry, a dry piece of wood, it's shaykh to become tameh. Why? It's not machsh. How could it become machsh? There's no liquid on it, right? You're not going to have soaking wet wood, right? So how does it become tameh? It's chibas hakodesh. It's a higher level that we take upon ourselves, the sanctity, and therefore we don't want anyone touching this stuff that's tameh. So therefore we will say al chibas hakodesh, it's a problem even if there's no liquid. Okay, that's first of all. The question though is, do we say that chibas hakodesh goes so far that not only does it become tameh, but also has the ability to transfer tumah onto other things? Says Rashi, im nitma matameh chermo lo. That's the question. So Rabbi Lezer Toshma, so the pasuk says in Vayikra, things that are consumed. So so we see clearly that it's only things which come in contact with liquid. So Atu what? Rav Shimon Lakish Rav Shimon Lakish. So what do you mean? He doesn't know this shita? Like he's asking this kashi. He doesn't know the notion that there's liquid. That's obvious. He knows that you need liquid. So then, what's his question? As we already established it, Rav Shimon Lakish chibas hakodesh, which doesn't have liquid, is it ka'echel haba b'mayim dam yolo? Does it take upon itself that same status? So that's the question. So Rabbi Lezer Nami Misuri Kra Kaimer. So he actually will also say that there is this extra piece of the pasuk. Michdi. Ksiv, the pasuk says v'chi yutan mayim al zera. And the whole drush is yutan ki yitain. It's not just, it has to be v'denichale, that you want the liquid there, which Gemara discusses that in many places based on this the language of this pasuk. Mikol oicha she'yochel lamali. So then why do you need the second piece of this pasuk as we continue with Beis? Lavi muti chibas hakodesh. It must be coming to tell you that it's coming to exclude chibas hakodesh. Says Rashi, the loy havi kehextra mayim mamish. In other words, yes, of course we believe there's a concept called chibas hakodesh, right? The question is, does it have the capacity to make other things tameh? So that's the question. Okay. So Gemara says, well, that's not what the pasuk is coming to exclude, because maybe it's not true. Maybe it's not a pasuk to say that chibas hakodesh doesn't cause other things to come tameh. Maybe the reason why the pasuk says it this way is chad b'tumas mace, the chad b'tumas sheretz. It's talking about two different forms of tumah, that that you need a liquid in order to be able to have the tumah continue. Tumas mace, hasam hu the boy hechsher. Why need some type of a hechsher? Yishum dul matama b'kadasha, because tumas mace is not matama at the level of adasha, of that of a lentil, but rather it's the size of a kazayas. Of a sheretz and matame b'kadasha, when it comes to a sheretz, which is matame by a kadasha size, emului boy hechsher. Maybe it doesn't need a hechsher because of this different measurement. So therefore, again, tumas mace and tumas sheretz are different measurements. Tumas mace is kazayas, tumas sheretz is a kadasha. Yeshmin and sheretz mishum dul matama tumas shiva. Of mace matama tumas shiva imulo li boy hechsher sricha. Of course, we know that what requires tumas shiva and paradum and all that, that's dafka when it comes in contact with a mace. You become an avatuma from the avi avasatuma. Sheretz, which is matama adam v'kelim onto a rishon level, so it's it requires erev shemesh, etc. But you don't have tumas shiva. So therefore, since we don't have that same stringency, so therefore maybe it doesn't require hechsher. So that, in other words, we don't answer our question because it's possible that we need this pasuk and both parts of this pasuk to tell us these two things. Mazar Rav Yosef, Rav Shimon Aimer, Hochsher b'shchita, Hochsher v'yafilu miminyani b'hu rishon v'sheni. Now, when our Mishnah said, according to the Shita of Rav Shimon, that once you do the shchita, that it's Hochsher kabel toma, it doesn't mean not just that it becomes tameh. It means that that let's say it gets touched by someone's tummy, but it also has the capacity to make something else tummy. Even on a Rishon and Sheni level, how does that work? It must be because it works. Even though it's interesting because our Mishnah was really talking about Chulin, and when we said maybe it's not Toma Chulin, but nonetheless, this is the proof apparently, right? So asu okay, so this is the next level. In other words, is it a din deraisa or a din derabanan? Because if it's deraisa, then it can be burned. If it's derabanan, if the tumah is only a tumah derabanan chibas hakodesh, then it would not be able to be burned. So that's really the question. If it becomes tameh, let's say truma tameya, if it can be burned. So that's what we're talking about over here. So maybe we're not going to burn truma kachim if it comes in contact with it. Which again is the question is it the status of a din deraisa, and therefore you would burn this, the truma. Amar Rav Zera Tashma habaytzel gas, which is discussed in Masechet Sukkah as well as in Shabbos. So habaytzer lagas, a person who has this press. So Shammai Omer Hoksher, Hillel Omer Lu Hoksher. So there's this machlokas between Shammai and Hillel, mostly in the first parak in Shabbos. Says Rashi, what is this machlokas? Now, this liquid that comes in contact with the produce, you don't really want this liquid to ooze out onto it. It's something which really is something which basically drips away, and it's waste and worthless. Gazrinan la liyasiyah Shabbos. They still make a gezerah, and the Gemara over there brings a couple reasons, but the Gemara that's quoted over here in Rashi is Shem Yivtzrin Bekupos Mizufafais. That maybe, basically, you may put it into like a closed basket, and therefore, in others, you may actually wish to retain, to keep that liquid, and therefore it is nichale, you do want it, it's not le'ibud, and therefore it is machshir. So that is the machlokas Beisham Beis Hillel. Do we make this gezerah of Shema Yivtzeren Bekupos Mezufafais? So that's the machlokas Beisham Beis Hillel over there Masechet Shabbos. Mishosakali Hillel Shammai, and then ultimately Hillel seems to agree to the sheet of Shammai. So why is he so quick to just say this? This is not an oichel that comes from liquid, says Rashi. Right? He doesn't want this liquid. It's a lo nichale. Right? So what is he arguing? He can just say, no, I'm not geyser, and we're talking about baskets which are perforated, which holes in it, and therefore it's going to be ibud, and therefore it's something you don't want. So apparently the fact that he's silent shows support to what we're saying. So as we're saying that it's considered only on the Rabbanan level. I was talking about how it becomes Hoksha B'Shchita, and you say to me that it's considered like Hechsher Mayim. I told you that when it comes to Shchita is Hoksher, and you're telling me an example of something which is like Hechsher. V'yarmelach Rav Zer v'yarmel asu kehechsher mayim. Rav Shimon Lakish nami asu hechsher mayim. So atu what Rav Shimon Lakish litos k'meboyle. It was a case of savek ki k'meboyle lisrayv. The whole question is, do we burn it? Right, as we said before, and Rashi reiterates over here. If in fact we call it Risheni midaraisa, is it midaraisa lisrayv truma in order to be able to burn the truma? Oh, kodesh achar shenagaba. That is the whole question, right? Mechlal dechib is kodesh deraisa. So this whole point is trying to support the fact that Chibus HaKadosh actually is the din d'oraisa. From this pasuk it says, and this is referring to kachim, that when it comes to basar that touches something which is tamei, high basar diskash b'mai. How did this meat become susceptible to tuma? Ilim diskash b'dam. Maybe it's through the blood. I already know that dam is not a machshir. Don't eat, don't consume it. It has to be something that can be poured like water. So dam hanishma kamayim machshir. When it comes to blood that you could just pour like water, like just spill it out because it has no utility, then that's machshir, just like water. There's no mitzvah to do, you can spill water. So too when it comes to the dam, you can spill it. Shenu nishma kamayim enu machshir, which is referring to a carbon, for example. So like carbonice, where you need zrikas hadam, that blood cannot be poured on the ground. In order to achieve kapara, you need to be able to zrikas hadam on the mizbech. If you don't do zrika, then it's not going to be a machshir. It's not going to be machshir. So we already know that the dam cannot be the thing that made this meat susceptible. So what does it mean, this pasuk? How to become tummy? Ella diskasher maybe b'mashkebes mitbachaya. Maybe it became machshir by the slaughterhouse. So not necessarily from the dam, but maybe, as Rashi reminds us, as all in Gemara and Shabbos, is referring to the liquid of mayim shirachs behen abasar b'beis hamad b'chayim ba'azara. So there was actually a slaughterhouse in the Azara, in the base of Mikdash, and there they would be spritzing water on the meat. So the water, we know water is a machshir, so maybe that's how it became tummy. V'hom Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina, it's not true. Even though it's water, we also look at where it took place. Not only do we say that it is good, dachan is like it's pure, it's fine, that it's not going to become tameh, el she'en machshirin. We say that it's not machshir. When it comes to the base of Mikdash, there are multiple steps, just like in Shvus B'Mikdash, we also want to minimize the potential of tumah. So therefore, even though it comes in contact even with water, but since it took place in the Beit Machai, in the Azara, so therefore that water will not be machshir. So again, what does this pasuk mean? V'basar sheyiga b'chol tamei. How to become tamei? V'chi tema tirgama adam. So says Rashi, mishum de'amrina de'ein nishma chamayim adam. Rather, it's not adam, but right, adam. Right. We're talking about blood. Says Rashi. Ein machshirin. When it says ein machshirin, right? Then there's the statement rather of Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina regarding the Beit Machaya is only talking about blood, right? In the blood in the butchery, right? For Hamashki Kaimer, he doesn't say that. He says liquid mashki, b'mashki Beit Machaya, right? Which means even water, right? So he doesn't make a distinction what type of liquid. It's never machshir. So we see it's a deraisa, right? We see that the notion of chibas hakaidish is actually den deraisa. Dilma could Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Do you remember Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel? Could go in shahaisul parash shel zivchei shlomim. Let's say we're dealing with a para of a shlomim, carbon shlomim. Vavir benachal, and it went through the river. Shachdav yadain mashke toifeach aleha, and there was liquid on it, right? In other words, the water didn't come. So again, the question: how did it become susceptible to tumah? So it could be you went before it went to the base of Mikdash, it got wet, right? That's the answer, right? In other words, lav dafka, this is pasuk telling you a raya that chibas hakadosh is din deraisa. Maybe not. How did it become wet? Couldn't have come wet from the dam, because the dam is not a machshir, because it says and it can't be spilled. Okay, so maybe it's some water. No, the water in the butchery, in the Azara, no. So maybe so it took place, got wet before the Azara. It didn't have a towel, and it's right. That's so. In other words, lav dafka is this a raya to chibas hakodesh el maseifa. So how do we takasi a din deraisa v'habasar? And we saw this in Rashi. The fact that it says v'habasar, now that word seems to be extra. We don't really need that because obviously, what are we talking about? We're talking about basar. So why does that have to mention basar? Rabbi's eitzim l'avaina. It's coming to include these things. Eitzim l'avaina b'nei chilin who can't eat them. Chibas hakodesh machshuhu mishavu oichel hachana chibas hakodesh mikashrasa. So therefore, we see that that's the din. There's a din deraisa of chibas hakodesh. Lam and Zayin Alf. My. So now we go back to our question. Look at Rashi up top. Gufahu diahani avol diatami ihu achrini loy odel maloshna. So kima hanechibas hakodesh midiraisa is only psul the gufa that in itself can become tummy even though it was no liquid. Avol minyana berishon v'sheni loy, maybe it can't make other things tummy odel maloshna, and then finally enough with teku. So we don't really have an answer to this question, but now we've paved the way of what this was talking about. Okay, we're going to stop there. Question 8. Chimas hakodesh demachsheres him deraisahu. The answer is yeah, it is deraisa. We finally found support, and the question is, we moinin barishon sheni. The question is, do we say that it can make something into a rishon and a sheni? And the answer is yes. Midirabanan, it does. But the question is, midiraisa, we don't know, right? So if it's only, is the deraisa level of chibas hakodesh that it becomes tameh, and only midirabanan it can make other things tameh, then you can't burn those things because it's only two midirabanan. However, if the chibas hakodesh is not just a deraisa referring to it becoming tameh, but also making other things tameh, then we'd also have to do the burning of it. And that, again, we stop with a teku. Okay. Question TA 4. Reish Lakish im meinen rishain v'sheni b'chibas hakodesh. Pretty straightforward question. So midiraisa, it's a question. Midirabanan, definitely we do. And that's basically all there is. Question TB7. So what does it mean, Chulin? So we had this already with question 7. Hopefully I wrote it correctly. Let's see. This is TB7. Let's see what I wrote. If you wipe off the dam between each simin, so zen nira shlo nichale, okay. I'm not sure. But Chulin, im oised ze, v'loy machshir and matame. Okay, I don't know what I'm writing here. Yesh safek im armim yesh l'shchil me'chil b'yad soif o eno elo b'saif. The Chulin hainu b'sveika lo sarf and v'lo oichlin. So that is, the second answer is definitely correct. What is this first? If you wiped off the blood before, right. So v'toilin, if you do this, right? Because he holds. You should write this. Because yesh l'shchita. Let me write it differently. Ein l'shchita el b'soif. So since he holds ein l'shchita el b'sof, so therefore the beginning we have to be toilet to see, are you going to wipe it off or not?